Jaya Baba Para Jaya Baba Para Raya Baba Para Shila Baba Para Nitagani Aribo Aribo Nitago Aribo Nitaigo Premanandi Srila Prabhupada Ki Kanta Shrimad Bhagavatam Ki Go Premanandi Hare Krishna. Can I have the other? Also, which language are we speaking today? Almost seems like there's more English-speaking people here than German. But, English? But we need somebody to translate for Kishori Kund Mataji. Dann sind beinahe mehr Englischsprachige jetzt hier. Ne? Englisch, 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 Englisch. Dass du wirklich die Einzige bist, die kein Englisch versteht. Tja, du verstehst auch kein Englisch. Ja, irgendjemand muss übersetzen für diejenigen, die kein Englisch verstehen. Naja, schauen wir mal. Fangen wir mal an und vielleicht kommt ja noch jemand. Om Agyantmandasya Gyananjala Shalakaya Chakshunmalitam Dena Tasmai Shri Gove Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manupastam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upakaramayam Dadati Svabadantikam Namaham Vishnupada Krishabhasta Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Govani Pachayine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pashatari Shatarine Vanchakapa Tubasha Kripa Sinivevacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Go Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, brand new batteries. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 24, verse number 27. Aho papachyamananam. Aho papachyamananam. Niraye svaya amangalai. Niraye svaya amangalai. Kalena bhuyasa nunam. Kalena bhuyasa nunam. Pashiranti hadevataha. Pasiranti hadevataha. Aho papachyamananam. Niraye svaya amangalai. Kalena bhuyasa nunam. Pashiranti hadevata. Somebody chant. Ladies.
Aho papachyamananam.
Aho papachyamananam.
Niraye svaya amangalai.
Niraye svaya amangalai.
Kalena bhuyasa nunam.
Kalena bhuyasa nunam.
Prasidanti hadevata.
Prasidanti hadevata.
Aho. Oh. Papachyamanam, with those being much afflicted. Niraye, in their hellish material entanglement. Svai, their own. Amangalai, by misdeeds. Kalena bhuyasa, after a long time. Nunam, indeed. Pashiranti, they are pleased. Iha, in this world. Devataha, the demigods. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Kadama Muni said, "Oh, after a long time, the demigods of this universe have become pleased with the suffering souls who are in material entanglement because of their own misdeeds." And the purport by Srila Prabhupada. This material world is a place for suffering, which is due to the misdeeds of the inhabitants, the conditioned souls themselves. The sufferings are not extraneously imposed upon them. Rather, the conditioned souls create their own suffering by their own acts. In the forest, fire takes place automatically. It is not that someone has to go there and set a fire. Because of friction among various trees, fire occurs automatically. When there is too much heat from the forest fire of this material world, the demigods, including Brahma himself, being harassed, approached the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and appealed to him to alleviate the condition. Then the Supreme Personality of Godhead descends. In other words, when the demigods become distressed by the sufferings of the conditioned souls, they approach the Lord to remedy the suffering, and the Personality of Godhead descends. When the Lord descends, all the demigods become enlivened. Therefore, Kadama Muni said, after many, many years of human suffering, all the demigods are now satisfied because Kapila Dev, the incarnation of Godhead, has appeared. So before I want to talk about the verse, I thought let me express my joy that I have the opportunity to visit you again in Simhachalam and see all of you after quite a few months. And of course I can immediately perceive that there is a fresh and new energy and new wind blowing here in Simhachalam, and that there's more structure, more systematic development, more strategic planning going on. So this is really wonderful and very inspiring for me to see that Govinda Dev Prabhu and his good wife are really trying to bring things on a higher level. Because actually it brings to mind a little incident which happened just before Prabhupada left this world. In the middle of the night, he was calling for Giriraj Maharaj, in the middle of the night. And he asked Giriraj Maharaj, do you think this movement will go on when I'm not here anymore? And Giriraj Maharaj said, yes, Prabhupada, as long as we chant 16 rounds every day and follow the 4 regulative principles, it will go on. But Prabhupada was not satisfied with this answer. He said, intelligence and organization. Yes, intelligence and organization. That's really required in order to fight against Maya and develop projects and so on. And so the fact that here now more planning and systematic development happens, this, I'm sure this must be very pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. And maybe I also quickly just share with you what I have been doing over the last 5 months, because we all had to learn a little bit how to deal with this pandemic, right? Especially also as a traveling preacher, it takes a while to reorientate yourself and work out how to deal with this. And so last summer I just came to the conclusion that I will not allow myself to get too intimidated by this, and that the preaching is just so important. So I just went on tour again for the whole last 5 months. And because especially now during this pandemic, this preaching is more than ever, it is so important. There's so many communities out there, so many nice projects where people are really waiting for somebody to come and visit, where people are very eager for association, very grateful if somebody comes. So and on this foundation of eagerness and gratitude, one actually can, reach people's hearts and give them something more deeper and meaningful. And that is definitely the most satisfying thing to the heart. So yes, I had quite a nice time traveling to quite a few different countries, to Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. That's where we met. And Lithuania, we also had a holy name retreat, and devotees arranged an interview on TV for me, which I haven't done that often before. And interviews with 3 very popular magazines. Oh, I should show you this. I have them with me, actually. Pretty nice. 6 pages of colorful presentations on Krishna consciousness there, you know. Yeah, so it was a very stimulating time. And then I went to Croatia, did a whole tour for 4 weeks around the country. There's also so many communities which I had never visited before. And then I went to Sweden, to Almvik. I hadn't been there for 5 years. And the most amazing thing was that these little personalities from 5 years ago, all of a sudden, they were young adults. They were 2 meters high and very dedicated to Krishna consciousness. So this was a real, it was such a joyful experience. And I was, of course, thinking also, yes, this we will also experience here in Simhachalam one day, when all the children who are born now, you know, after 15, 20 years, I hope I will not be around anymore in this body, 20 more years. But yeah, it's just really a long-term investment, you know, like planting trees or something. And then after 20 years, you can actually harvest the fruits, and you have a whole new generation there of dedicated devotees who want to give their life to that project. So yeah, it was very, very wonderful. And then I also spent some time in Gulagadam, where I started writing my next book. And also, yes, I did have the joy to publish one more book in August last year. And actually this book I mainly put together here in Simhachalam. And in the acknowledgement in the beginning, I am mentioning my gratitude to the Simhachalam devotees that they allowed me to stay here and took care of me while I was working on this book. So this was also, a nice event for me that I got this published. So and now I'm working on the next book. And yes, I will go on tour again. So maybe if devotees allow me, I will sometimes come for a visit, but I am back on tour and traveling, and this is just more important for me than this whole pandemic and what measures to take and all this kind of thing there. You know. Good. All right, so let us have a look at the today's verse. So here Kadama Muni speaks to his son, Kapiladev, and Prabhupada very nicely explains in the purport how, you know, the human being creates his own suffering, because this is very often, this argument comes up that people say, oh, why is God so cruel that he allows all this suffering to go on in the material world? There cannot be God, otherwise why is so much suffering? But no, human being creates their own miseries by not following God's laws and recommendations and instructions. That's the whole point. And yes, as Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, yada yada hi dhammasya, so whenever religiosity declines, when demoniac forces become too prominent, then he appears, and usually he appears on the beggings, on the prayers of the demigods or a very advanced personality. That's usually how it goes. So soon, next month, we have Advaita Acharya's appearance. So he was calling out to the Lord, and he, convinced the Lord he had to come as Mahaprabhu. So that's usually how it works. And there is a nice quote where Prabhupada describes how the Lord and the demigods and the human beings, how they all work together, how there is an invisible chain of cooperation. I want to read this to you. This is from 1st Canto, 19th chapter, verse 18. There, Prabhupada explains, a demigod takes pleasure in seeing someone go back to Godhead. He is always pleased when a devotee of the Lord, he's always pleased with a devotee of the Lord, so much so that by his Adidevic powers, he may help the devotees in all respects. And by their actions, the Lord is pleased with them. There is an invisible chain of complete cooperation between the Lord, the demigods, and the devotees of the Lord on earth. So I find this a very nice point, how there is how there is this invisible chain of cooperation. So this cooperation happens on all different levels, you know. So, and this statement comes when Parikshit Maharaj goes back to Godhead. There the demigods are all full of joy and jubilation and showering flower petals and so on. So, and there Prabhupada says, yes, when a pure devotee goes back to Godhead, the demigods are very pleased. So there is this invisible chain there between the Lord, the demigods, and the pure devotees. But in the same way, the other way round, when the devotees in this world are suffering due to the demoniac forces taking over and becoming too prominent, then the demigods also suffer. So then they appeal to the Lord, please come and help, do something. And then again he comes, and then again everybody's pleased. So this is this invisible chain there of cooperation, you know, very nicely expressed. Yeah. And yes, and I mean in the following chapter we hear, you know, Kapila Dev's instruction, how the living entity entangles himself in this whole material world through fruitive activities, the three modes of material nature, and. So I do want to take this opportunity to one more time look a little bit on the whole story of Kadama Muni, to have a little bit of an overview, because this is just such a powerful story which gives us so many relevant and important instructions for our own life. Because Kadama Muni really sets the example to us how a civilized, cultured human being should move through these different phases in life. The ashrams, basically, right? Because Kadama Muni, as we remember, he also spent time as a kind of a brahmachari, performing very strict tapasya, austerities, meditation, becoming very powerful, developing through this tapasya, very powerful energies, and also absorbed himself in knowledge and realizations and so on. So, but then nevertheless, he did enter also the Grihastha ashram. Yes. And in the beginning of his Grihastha life, he also maintained a rather austere mood, and Devahuti was fully, following in his mood, surrendering to his mood and his ways, how he wanted to serve the Lord. She followed him to such an extent that she neglected herself also. So, but then also, nevertheless, he also created this flying mansion there to give his wife some kind of sense enjoyment, So it also shows that there is also room for sense gratification in Grihastha ashram. You know, Prabhupada was always saying Grihastha life is a kind of license for sense gratification, a kind of, a so-called license, because it is all in that frame of Krishna's instructions and Krishna consciousness. And in this regard, there is a nice little example Prabhupada gives, that he compares sense gratification to salt. And this is in 3rd canto, 15th chapter, so you must have read this already a while ago. 15th chapter, verse 8. There Prabhupada explains, sense gratification is just like salt. One cannot take too much or too little, but one must take some salt in order to make one's foodstuff palatable. The conditioned souls who have come to this material world should utilize their senses according to the direction of the Vedic literature. Otherwise, they will be put into more miserable conditions of life. Yeah, so and when you search in the Veda base, salt and sense gratification, you get these references where Prabhupada talks about it in lectures, and where he makes this point, where he explains it more, and he says, yes, human being cannot enjoy nice food stuff without salt. So a little bit of salt is necessary. A little bit of sense gratification is required, but not too much. And he says, and the foolish person, he thinks, oh, the salt brings out the whole flavor in the item, in the preparation. So the salt is so important. So let me take a whole pot of salt. Let me eat a whole pot of salt. You know? And that's the foolishness of humanity in this world, that people think, yes, I need a whole pot of salt, and that will make me more happy even, because after all, salt is so important in the cooking. Without salt, it will not be tasty. You know? Yeah, so it's a nice little way how to understand that. Yeah, we cannot deny the salt completely. So we do need some little enjoyment there, but it is all in the frame of Krishna consciousness, all according to the rules and regulations. And then there's gradual upliftment. And we can also see this in the story with Kadama Muni, that, after enjoying in the flying mansion there and having 9 daughters, and somehow, they got to the point where they were saying, so now it's enough, enough. Because it was very clearly understood that after the Grihastha ashram, there is another ashram. There is the renounced order. Yes. And that's the chapter of our, that's the title of our chapter here, the renunciation of Kadama Muni. So, and this is really one thing which I feel cannot be emphasized enough, that we clearly understand after this Grihastha ashram, there is another ashram. There is the Vanaprastha ashram. And that should be for everyone. Often we think Vanaprastha ashram is maybe just for some brahmanas or something. But no, because these family attachments, they are so strong. And even Kadama Muni, sets that example, even though his son is Kapiladev, is the Lord himself. So one could very easily say, well, why should he take to the order of renunciation? He's got the Lord himself taking birth in his family. So why giving up these family relationships? Because Kapiladev is the Lord himself. Wouldn't it be better then if he would stay at home, and get the association of the Lord as his son? But no. He sets that example just to illustrate, just to instruct us how important it is that after the Grihastha ashram, there has to be the renounced order of life. Yes. Because these family attachments are so strong, so deep, so subtle, not easy to give up, because that's the test at the moment of death. Which relationship is most important to us? That's the test, you know. Is it our relationship with our husband, wife, children, grandchildren? Or is the relationship with Krishna most important? That's the test. And one simply has so much more chance to pass that test if we plan right from beginning that this last phase of life should be spent in the mood of renunciation, giving up the family attachments, leaving the cozy home, you know, leaving and preaching or serving, spending time in the holy Dham, detaching ourselves from these family entanglements, you know, very, very important. I mean, some time ago there was some symposium type program in Mayapur about the 4 ashrams, and there was for each ashram a speaker. So, and when the speaker came, who was supposed to present the Vanapasa ashram, his first statement was, well, actually we don't exist, you know. We are not existing at this point. It's not established in ISKCON. You know? Yes. So that's really the state of affairs at the moment, that this renounced phase in life is not deeply established. And because we hear again and again in the Bhagavatam how deep and entangling these family attachments are, very often we may come to the wrong conclusion and think, oh well, so let's avoid it altogether. Better not get married. But that's also the wrong conclusion. You know? No, the right conclusion is we have to plan our life in such a way that after the Grihastha ashram comes the Vanapasta ashram. That's the solution, you know. Yes. And because also Prabhupada gives this nice example, you know, with when we step into a thorn, we have a thorn in our foot. So this is a very uncomfortable and painful situation. And we can take a second thorn to pull out the first thorn, if we are expert. Right? So that's exactly what family life is all about, because this man-woman attraction is binding us to the material world, you know. It causes misery, but the same man-woman relationship within Krishna consciousness as an ashram we can use to free ourselves from this man-woman attraction, you know. And very easily when devotees think, oh, you know, Grihastha life, man-woman relationship, it's all suffering, I better stay away from it. Only very few personalities, very rare souls don't need to go through this example. But if others try to avoid it, then very easily they walk around all their life with this thorn in their foot. Right? Yes. Uncomfortable, still pricking there. But yeah, you know, we don't want to take the other thorn to take it out, you know. But if we are not expert, then very easily we end up with 2 thorns in the foot, which also happens a lot, you know. If our family life is not an ashram, then we end up with 2 thorns in our foot, and that's also not the idea. Yeah, well, it's really like that. So, and I mean, we all know that non-devotees, they are planning their retirement, you know. Yes, For 30 years, they're planning, especially in Germany. People pay their Rentenversicherung, so they get their Rente, their pension insurance. German people are very conscious of, pension insurance, and you have to get your pension. So people plan for this for so many years. Of course, their plan is to one more time enjoy life to the maximum and cruise, around the world on some luxury ships or whatever, visit exotic islands, and so that's their understanding of this last phase of life. But they're planning, they're meditating, they're looking forward, they're cultivating, that outlook. So in the same way as a devotee, we should also plan, for this last phase in renunciation, definitely. But this is not really happening, Yes. There's not even that understanding there, that Grihastha ashram is only one part in this whole journey, and it's not the final stage, it's not Endstation, but no, we are meant to move on, And I have seen in some questionnaires of topics that devotees discuss when they enter married life, I have seen that question on the list of discussion before people even get married, that they share, they discuss. So what is your expectation and outlook on the stage, when the children are grown up and so on, It should be discussed, And I once heard in a lecture, this was on a wedding, on a Vivaha Yagya. Can't even remember who spoke, but one personality was making this strong statement, saying, actually to enter married life without having a clear plan how to move on and leave it again, not by getting divorced, of course, but to move into the renounced phase of life, that's already a failure. You are saying that as at a wedding. Yeah, so in earlier times, this was understood. It was the norm that yes, after family life has to come this phase of renunciation. And that's what Kadama Muni is really showing us here. Even though he has the Supreme Lord as his family member, still you should move on and give it up. Yes. Yeah, so, and I mean, once we understand this importance, then of course it becomes very clear that there's also a certain timeline there, That's why Prabhupada in the Bhagavatam, he recommends that ideally, and of course I know for many of us, we may have joined later and gotten married much later and so on, so it's not ideal. But ideally, a man should be married when he is 28 or 30. And then, when the children are 20, he's only 50. And then he can take Vanaprastha. And when I was on my tour in Croatia, I actually stayed with one senior Grihastha couple, and they had started their family life very early, and they were not even 50. They were 48. Kids were grown up. Daughter was married. Son was studying in the United States and working, and I thought, wow, this is how it really should be, actually, ideally. When you're 48, 50, kids are grown up. Family duties are finished, and as a rule, when we are 48, 50, we still have a lot of energy to get back into full absorption and service, more tapasya, sharing, traveling, preaching, That's actually how it should be. That's Krishna's system, And there is a few nice quotes which I do want to share with you in this regard. where Prabhupada, I mean, there's so many quotes, but where Prabhupada really expresses that. This is also 3rd canto, 30th chapter, so we will get there also, and 14th verse. Prabhupada says, family attraction is so strong that even if one is neglected by family members in his old age, he cannot give up family affection, and he remains at home just like a dog. So that's in regards to Dhritarashtra. In the Vedic way of life, one has to give up family life when he is strong enough. It is advised that before getting too weak and being baffled in material activities, and before becoming diseased, one should give up family life and engage oneself completely in the service of the Lord for the remaining days of his life, and so on. And then there's also another nice quote where Prabhupada says, no king or respectable gentleman would continue family life till the end, because that was considered suicidal and against the interest of the perfection of human life. In order to be freed from all family encumbrances and devote oneself 10% in the devotional service of the Lord Krishna, this system is always recommended for everyone. For everyone. Because it is the path of authority. Yeah, so there's very, very strong statements in the Bhagavatam which really highlight and emphasize the need for this last phase in renunciation. And it needs to be cultivated. Even, people may think, oh, why is she talking about that now? I'm just starting here having babies and, I don't want to hear now about renunciation. But no, it should be there, always in the back of the mind. That sooner or later, I'm going to have to move on. I'm going to have to let go and, and detach myself. Otherwise, very difficult to really come to this point where the relationship with Krishna is really the most important one at the time of death. Yes. I remember once in Mayapur we also had I arranged a Panda program on this topic of Vanaprastha ashram, and I was like the MC there, and I invited all different speakers and Maharajas. It was very, very nice. Many people came, 300, 400 people came, a lot of Prabhupada disciples, just to bring some attention to this topic of Vanaprastha ashram. And there was one Prabhupada disciple, Pancharatna Prabhu. I don't know, maybe some of you know him. He lives in Mayapur with his wife, Atita Guna, Mataji. And I invited him to speak because, they're also in that phase. And he was making this comment, saying, the most difficult thing, the biggest challenge in this whole Vanaprastha topic are the grandchildren. That's what he was saying, because he had quite a few, or he still has. And yeah, grandchildren, because it's so charming and you feel you have to help and you want to serve, and if you're not careful, you just get all entangled again and you start all again in the grihastha mood with the grandchildren, Yes. Yes. And there's also a nice statement where Prabhupada makes this point. What is the perfect way of leaving one's body? Because once we understand how entangling the family attachments are, it's actually not so advisable as a devotee to leave our bodies surrounded by family members. Yes, we often don't even realize, we think, oh, this is so nice if, the children are there and the husband or the wife or the parents or whatever. But no, this is actually not recommended, because, when they're all sitting there on your bed and then more difficult to really focus on Krishna, and that brings our heart again back to the family relationships. And Prabhupada, where is it? He explains this very nicely, which I do want to share with you. Yeah, here. Before, this is 3rd canto, 30th chapter, verse 15. Before meeting death, one is sure to be a diseased invalid, and when he is neglected by his family members, his life becomes less than a dog's, because he is put into so many miserable conditions of life. Vedic literatures enjoin, therefore, that before the arrival of such miserable conditions, one should leave home and die without the knowledge of his family members. Yes. If a man leaves home and dies without his family knowing, that is considered to be a glorious death. Wow, pretty provocative, Prabhupada, Yeah. And then he says, but an attached family man wants his family members to carry him in a great procession, even after his death. And although he will not be able to see how the procession goes, he still desires that his body be taken gorgeously in procession. Thus he is happy without even knowing where he has to go when he leaves his body for the next life. So Prabhupada puts the two mentalities opposite each other, the attached family man who likes to be surrounded by the family members when he leaves, and whose main concern is, yes, the funeral has to be all gorgeous and this and that, big procession, and but no, for a devotee, it's glorious to leave one's body even without knowing the family members, without knowing it, just surrounded by devotees. There's not this deep family attachment there, So that actually is, should be more the goal, to leave without the family members knowing and sitting there around the bed and so on, Yeah, so in any case, these are all different points we can get from the story with Kadama Muni, very nicely described, and he demonstrates to us how we should go through these different phases in life. And, because in a few verses, this point will come where Kadama Muni, takes to the renounced order. And then we will also hear how Devahuti also, she becomes also very austere again. She absorbs herself in the knowledge which her son Kapila Dev is giving her, and she also perfects her life like that by accepting tapasya again and so on, And if that is clearly established, then even if there's a little bit of sense enjoyment happening in Grihastha life, but if that clear understanding is there, this is just a temporary phase. And sooner or later the point comes where we say, so that's enough now, enough playing around. Let's get back to the real business of life here. If that is clearly established, then, much easier to really perfect one's life, Yes. And I mean, another misconception I'm often coming across is that people understand, yes, this husband-wife affection, family affection is so binding, then people come to this misconception that, okay, we have to avoid affection in family life. So better not to show any kind of affection. No loving dealings. It's all maya, it's all entangling. Another misconception people often come to. And then the atmosphere in the home is all very strange, and the poor children who grow up in that atmosphere, because the husband doesn't dare to show some affectionate dealings there with his wife. All the wrong conclusions. You know, the proper conclusion is there has to be a phase of renunciation, you know, to disentangle oneself and so on, you know. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Maybe somebody has some comments, some questions. We'll start with you, Puru.
One thought and one question.
Sorry?
One reflection and one question.
Okay.
Because you said, thank you for the wonderful class, it's a nice topic. You said when we die with family members, it could be also know that because then you're attached again, you think about it at the time of death, on all the nice experiences with your family members, and then you forget Krishna, and then you take birth probably in the same family again.
Yes.
One thought I had.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I remember when my father left his body, that's 13 years ago or something, he had actually a really nice departure, really amazing, on the Ekadashi morning, the Ekadashi in September, which is Vamanadev's appearance, you know, and he was fully focused, completely conscious. I mean, it was amazing. He really taught me how to leave his body, you know. But then just 10 minutes before he left, he was reaching out to me. I was standing there next to him and chanting quietly japa, and he was reaching out to me, "Oh, my dear little," you know, and he said my nickname as a child, how my parents called me. I'm not going to tell this now, so otherwise you're going to tell me like that. But he was reaching out to me, "Oh, my dear little such and such." But I did not take the hand. You know, I let his hand fall back on his bed, you know, because I wanted to give him that space to detach, you know. Of course, I mean, if a person is not a practicing devotee and he is attached to a devotee child, this probably is still beneficial, you know. But still, yeah, one has to try to somehow help that person to detach from these family relationships, you know. And I remember once I taught that in a seminar, and then afterwards people came up to me saying, "How can you be so cruel? Your father is dying and he's reaching out to you, and you know, and you're not taking his hand." So from a mundane point of view, it may look like that, you know, but from a spiritual point of view, no, come on, Father, move on, you know, don't hang on, you know, to your attachments here to your children, but move on. You know. Yeah.
The question was, in the beginning you mentioned about Kadama Muni, that he showed us with his own example that it should be for everyone, Vanaprastha ashram. My doubt is a little bit, like Prabhupada also gave us the four regulative principles.
Yes.
And of course, as devotees we practice this, but it's like a very high standard actually, communicable.
Yes.
Because for Shudras or lower classes, they didn't have these principles. So is it for Vanaprastha, should it be really for everyone, or is it only for people who want to go back to Krishna, who want to leave this material world? Vanaprastha, or should it be also an argument? Many devotees maybe they don't like it, go back to Krishna, I don't know. They like it somehow in the material world and make it comfortable. They may be 70, but they still, like you said, play with the grandchildren and attachments.
Well, I am assuming, but maybe I'm wrong there, you know. I am assuming that those people who take up devotional service, that they're striving to become pure devotees and that they want to go back to Godhead. And for all those personalities who do want to go back to Godhead, which hopefully is the majority in ISKCON. Yes. Yeah, I mean, all right, we can narrow it down and we can say those personalities who are striving for pure devotional service and who want to eventually go back to Godhead, even though it may not be after this life. But there is, well, I mean, you know, I have a whole course on Vanaprastha ashram, which I also hope to put into book form one day. But there's so many quotes. We've just read the one too, where Prabhupada says it's for everyone. For everyone, you know? Because we also have to consider when you read different descriptions of Vanaprastha ashram, there's one quote where it says, so if we follow all these rules and we don't eat meat in that time, then we reach such and such planets, Tapaloka or whatever it was, so that gives a clear understanding that actually the system was like that these ashrams were for everyone, even when they were not Vaishnavas. That was the understood system. And all right, in those days, for those who were not Vaishnavas, then all right, the sudras didn't have to follow it, But amongst those who practice the Vaishnav process of Bhakti Yoga, it is a must. Yes, I mean, we have also people with Shudra mentality who have Brahman initiation and are on the altar, So this is all pretty mixed up these days, because even a Shudra can also perform these services, and reach perfection, Yes. So no, it is really a thing that, we should all keep in the back of the mind, and we should consciously plan for it. Consciously plan, Yes, definitely. There was a few more hands up. We'll continue with Sanjay Prabhu. Let me see. It was also a third canto, the quote where Prabhupada comments how. Yeah, this is 3:30:15. And there was one more question. Vitu Prabhu, did you want to?
Yes, my question is, I hear so often from personalities I actually strive for, who are like role models for me, but they say when you can avoid grihastha, don't do it because you're entangled in material things, Mataji Maya and all of that. But when I read the scriptures, and as you said right now, it's like it's coming from Krishna's system.
Yes.
And sometimes I'm really confused in that. And
Yes.
I just wanted maybe you can point out how there is this proper understanding of the ashram and what really is Krishna's desire for us to live like.
Yes.
Because sometimes I think, okay, even a guru once told me as a recommendation why one should have one family when he can be the father of the whole world. And actually I'm striving for the highest, but Krishna's recommendation is that, so I'm so confused about that.
Yes. Yeah, well, you're completely right. There is a lot of confusion over this, And in the earlier days it was more extreme even, that, family life was completely abominable and Maya and so on. But you look at all our previous acharyas, most of them were grihasthas, So there's several aspects there. First of all, in the 9th canto, there is one purport where Prabhupada very clearly says, only very Brahminically minded men don't need that feminine energy to be empowered and inspired. And this is very rare to find. Men who are very Brahminically minded by nature, naturally Brahminical. And Prabhupada says, all those who are more Kshatriyas type personalities, they definitely need a wife, definitely. Yes. So that's one thing, and it has taken us, and maybe still is taking us, a long time to understand this. And my humble understanding is that this is one reason why so many sannyasis in ISKCON could not maintain their position as sannyasi, because this point was not understood. And many of those personalities who took sannyas, they did not have that deep Brahminical nature, so that they did not need that feminine energy to be empowered and inspired. So it's Krishna's arrangement that not only most or practically all women need that protection of a husband, but no, also most men need that feminine energy of a wife to be empowered and inspired and really develop themselves to the maximum. You know? Otherwise, which man would want to get married? You know, so Krishna arranged it all perfectly. So now another thing is, and I mean this is the topic of my next book, which I'm working on now, family life as an ashram, secrets of success. What we see now in most cases in family life is not an ashram. It's something else. That's the problem, you know. The way many, if not most, devotees conduct their family life in general in ISKCON today, it's not an ashram. There has not been enough training. People are not educating themselves. Many people just somehow slide into a relationship without preparation, without seminars, without literature, you know, because family life as an ashram, mundane family life, completely different story. I mean, this is the topic of this book, you know. This is a relevant topic for everyone, not only for people who are not married yet, but also for parents. They have to help their children to enter married life. It's the duty of the parents, you know. And for any senior devotees, anybody who serves as a guide or mentor or even manager, it's one of the main aspects of devotee care is to help people prepare to enter Grihastha ashram, you know. And because this has not taken place, that's why devotees are completely uneducated and untrained, and therefore their family life is not an ashram. And that gives a bad reputation to family life, you know. Then everybody thinks, oh, this family life is just useless. It's just troublesome. It's just so much divorce and so much misery. Better avoid it. Because we see very rarely good examples of family life as an ashram. You know? Yes. So there's a lot of work to be done, you know. But just the fact how many of our previous acharyas, you know, Mahaprabhu himself, Lord Nityananda, Advaita Acharya, you know, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada, that they were all grihasthas, but their life was an ashram, you know, was something completely different than what we experience today, you know. So that's an important thing we have to work on, to actually establish this family life as an ashram properly, because that's the main ashram which supports the whole Sankirtan movement is the Grihastha ashram, you know. Yeah. Okay. Very last question.
Only one, because I have two. About this Zoroastrian life, you said in other class that the best would be to have communities where there are children, parents, you know, free generations, that the children also can learn from the elders. So when you come to this stage, and you said the best would be not to know your family, your grandchildren.
Hang on, what? Best not to know your grandchildren?
I mean, to not entangle again.
I mean, let's be clear in this. Not to get too entangled with the grandchildren doesn't mean you should not know that you have grandchildren. Right? No. Please don't understand me in this way. No, of course, you have dealings with grandchildren, but you should actually treat them like you would treat any other child. You should be, you know, spiritually so matured that you can give affection to that grandchild and raise that grandchild to a higher level of consciousness and tell some stories, but without emotionally being completely absorbed and charmed and, oh, my grandchild. That's the point. That's the point. So it's not that we should not have any dealings with the grandchildren or something, but if our family life was an ashram, then we are so realized at that point that we can deal with a grandchild in an aloof and detached, but yet affectionate way. Yes. That's the point. And that's difficult, as Pancharatna Prabhu was saying, because you get charmed and easily emotionally entangled, Yes. Okay, good. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki, Ganta Chimad Bhagavatam ki, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki, Gaura Premanandi, Hare Krishna. No holiness. no holiness. Her grace is enough.